Hi, everybody. So this is episode 2 of Zoom In, Women Making Impact. And this is a video series that's newly launched to amplify the voices of women on Vancouver Island. And I want to thank Dr. Imogene Lim for joining us today. Imogene works in anthropology as well as global studies at Vancouver Island University. And her impressive bio can be read just below this video. So please do take the time to look at that. You can learn a little bit about her doctoral career, community engagement, family background, and other things there. So thank you, Imogene, for joining us today. Do you mind if we get right into the questions?
Absolutely. And thank you
Okay.
for inviting me.
Oh, thank you. And I also want to say, also, we're hoping to have this posted on International Human Rights Day, which is December 10th. And it's the final day of 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. So part of this is also in honor of the important work that you've been doing as the Human Rights and International Solidarity Chair for VIU's Faculty Association. So thanks again for being here. So you have a long and impressive history with community engagement, and also you've had lots of experience and academic rigor in your past. And I'm wondering about the connection between them and how they influence each other. And if you could share that with us.
Okay. This is kind of the chicken and egg story because I'm not sure which came first. Part of it is when I came to VIU, I was a contractual employee like many other people started, and whatever was asked of me to teach, I taught it, right? So it's only through time that I have ultimately sort of acquired or fine-tuned courses to reflect my personal interests, and sometimes that was related to a retirement. But that sort of chicken egg thing, so I'm going to talk a bit about community engagement, and this goes back to the year 2001. And I got a call from a community member. They wanted an academic to make some kind of comment to support the fact that Cumberland, which is up island, so it's just minutes away from Courtney, so if people don't know their geography, and they wanted somebody to say the heritage of this particular area was significant. So they, reached out to an academic. And I don't know whether they did the sort of dial who was available, but they got me. They did not know that I am a descendant of Cumberland's Chinatown. Okay. So, and this was the area that they had wanted to preserve for the community. So at that point in 2001, it was the property of Weldwood. And because Weldwood was planning on making a donation, so it's like, okay, here you have this lump of land. Of course, it was part of the Dunsmuir land, right? Coal mine. They were trying to determine, like where should this property go? Should it go to the village? Should it go to someone else? And the organization that was currently on the property was a rod and gun club. So rather than renewing their lease, they put it on hold while they tried to figure out what was going on. And this is where other community members from Cumberland said, wait, we could have this as a park. We don't have to have a gun club here. So if you are up there, the gun club is, or at least the property is very close to the roadway. And maybe back in the day, it might have been viewed as sort of like out there in the country more so. But, as population increase up and down the island, well, that roadway goes out to Comox Lake. So there's a lot of traffic, right? And there are, in fact, like houses basically across the road. So you know, if you're thinking about a safety thing, it's not that great to have a gun club so close to the roadway. In any case, there was this big debate about, you know, what happens to the property. So if you fast forward to now, 2020, people will say, wow, this is just so amazing. It's Coal Creek Historic Park.
Mm.
So they have walkways or trailways and signage both for the former Chinatown and #1 Japanese town to commemorate these two communities.
Mm.
So, like I said, that could have been lost.
Yes.
And so I've actually written a piece on this about this notion of erasure. Maybe we'll get to that. But here I was in this position being called, and like I said, the individual didn't know as a descendant. So this is where having a PhD comes into play, because you get to say, hey, I know something, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm also a descendant.
Mm-hmm.
So I attended the town halls, I went to the meetings, and I was the voice of the community, because at that time there was only one family left living there. And people of my parents' generation, they might not be happy about something, but they're not going to sort of be in your face, because part of survival was being quiet.
Right.
You know, like I grew up with don't rock the boat, because
Yeah.
so young people don't, you know, young people don't realize that that silence has been drummed into you as a survival mechanism. And this is why I say sometimes it was so drummed in, and now what's happening, all this built up holding back is erupting, and now I've become very noisy, because I recognize that I have this role to play, right? So I've got the gray hair, and as some people say, well, you know, people aren't so mean to people with gray hair, because, you know, you're quote unquote maybe an elder. So when you're too young, they'll say, oh, they're just too young, what do they know? But like I said, I got the gray hair, I got my degree, so maybe I do know something.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
So there's that aspect. So to make a point of my activism at that time, going to those town halls, I insisted that I be called Dr. Lim. Otherwise, I'm just this chick, you know, this gal.
Yeah.
And for the community, do they respect you for being who you are, like a descendant from the community? Because like I said, if you are from that community at that time and you were constantly silenced, what is with this noisy person coming in to sort of spoil your efforts at what you're trying to do for your community, not thinking about the whole community as such? And and like I said, you do the fast forward and everybody's like, wow, this is so great. You know, the heritage, you got this parkland, you know, and there's a covenant on it so that you can't just go build any old thing on it. Right. So there is this acknowledgement. So people are thinking, wow, so forward thinking. But in 2001, it was a fight.
Yeah.
It was a true fight. And because it was 2001, and to make the point of how I wanted to be perceived as a professional, I wore pantyhose. I do not wear pantyhose in general. But in 2001, I wore pantyhose to make the point, right? So I had a skirt on, I put the pantyhose on, you know, I had, well, actually for one of the town halls, I had a nice silk Chinese brocade jacket to sort of put it in their face that I'm ethnically Chinese, right? But I did have the pantyhose, my power pantyhose, my superpower pantyhose.
That's awesome.
that you know allowed me to speak. Well, I feel somewhat forcefully, because I don't know whether it was that particular town hall, but there was one town hall I was pulled aside, and I was told that I was being kind of mean and nasty in writing my rather assertive letters, and I was basically told to back off. So it was
Wow.
an official, and I was told back off, and that this conversation didn't happen. It was just between us two. So I'm not naming names, but
Yeah,
I'm
right.
just saying, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So they
so
wanted a version. They wanted a certain version of your engagement, and you were like, "Well, I'm here, and I'm
well,
engaging."
like I said, you know, I was writing letters to various members, you know, Village Council, Heritage Commission, blah, blah, blah,
Hmm.
stating why preserving, conserving the area was important. And
Hmm.
some people got it because, you know, we talk about publications. Well, I, I got a publication out of this, but
Yeah.
it's not like anybody's going to read it because it's the Scriveners. It's a magazine for notary publics. Like, when have you last picked up the magazine for the notary public, right? So it's called the Scrivener,
Yeah.
and they asked me to be part of it as serving as a pioneer in the sense of going forth and sort of making a statement and talking about what was Cumberland's Chinatown
Hmm.
and what I saw it to be, to envision it, you know,
Hmm.
to actually to see something like what's happened now,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know. So it's like that foresight that
Hmm.
was there. And you know, now everybody backslaps the council for being so wise in having Coal Creek Historic Park.
Hmm.
So I'm not
Hmm.
saying I did it alone, but
Right.
I like I said, I had those wonder pantyhose on, and
Yeah.
I was noisy.
Yeah.
So I was one of the noisier ones, and it's very hard to discount somebody who is in fact a descendant of the community,
Right.
right?
Absolutely. So you had this
So
additional, you have different kinds of credentials, right?
yeah,
Multifaceted credentials that you could bring
yeah.
to it. Yeah. So
And,
powerful.
I had talked to some of my elders from the community who were based in Vancouver, and you know, part of it was that those people who were more vocal, they said, yeah, go for it, and they were very happy that I was being noisy, because again, who's on the island
Right.
to make a statement, you know,
Hmm.
and that's part of the larger issue in terms of heritage, that if those community, like descendant communities, have left for economic reasons, there are
Hmm.
very few people who understand that history. So when you have newcomers, and so this is the other thing, you know, and this is part of the whole race issue, is that when people talk about Chinese, they don't recognize that, quote unquote, being Chinese, it's not a monolithic group.
Hmm.
So I am a descendant of what they call the low Wakyu, the old timers that came in that very first wave before new legislation came in the 60s.
Hmm.
So that background is very different than people who came in the 60s, and then the next wave, people coming in pre transfer of Hong Kong back to China, and
Hmm.
then, you know, the next wave in the sense of the super wealthy Chinese, because they realize that there's advantages of being in Canada for education, business,
Yeah.
etc. How those individuals see themselves are totally different than how I see myself. And we can in fact be clashing,
Yeah.
because I was born and raised in Canada, right?
Right.
And I had an American education. And I will say, because I was talking to somebody else, I would say that doing my grad studies in the States, and I'm not saying that this might not have happened, but it raised my consciousness to a level that somewhere along the way, I was no longer just Chinese Canadian, I was Asian Canadian.
Mm.
So that's a political
Hmm.
stance,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Because because what does it mean to be Asian? Because I've had people say, well, what do you mean by Asian? Do you mean East Asians, Southeast Asians, South Asians, West Asians? Because if you think about West Asians, we're talking about people from the Middle East.
Yeah,
And
right.
and do people from the Middle East see any kind of connection to people who are from China, Korea, Japan, which are the sort of standard East Asians, right?
Yeah.
So there's lots of different things going on. And like I said, people aren't cognizant when they sort of throw around that term Asian or that, oh, that you're Asian, right?
What that could embody.
Right. And
Right.
if there are, in fact, certainly in the States, whether there are quotas for Asians, you know, because I did do some work in the States. So I had I guess it was an 18-month scholarly vagabond time when I was at that time Malaspina. So there wasn't enough work, so I did the scholarly vagabond thing. And this again was that consciousness raising.
Yeah.
I work for a non-profit grassroots arts organization. So most people don't know this. So it was called Asian American Renaissance. I was the acting executive director. So this is where I practice my grant writing chops, because there was a period where I had to crank out a grant proposal like 2-3 a week, and it was like a 6-week period. And I thought, no, I am not going to do this for the rest of my life. It is too stressful. At least with teaching, you have this sort of up and down cycle. You've got some recovery period, and it's very clear what you can and can't do within that time period. Whereas if you are in a nonprofit and all of your money is soft money, you don't get the grants, nobody's got a job, right? And when I decided to leave, so I stayed there for 8 months.
Wow.
The chair of the board said, well, what would it take for you to stay? And I said, it's not about the money, because if it's the money, I have to find it. It's not like your guys are going to just pull it out of the, you know, some bag and give it to me. So it's like I said, it wasn't about the money. It was, yes, I could do it, but that probably would mean either an ulcer, like I said, it's stressful, or maybe a nervous breakdown. So those are not really optimum choices for me.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So I came back.
Yeah. And that,
but like I said,
but
that was also very informative to work with all Asian organization, because, and it's also a reminder of what is the norm for nonprofits, and the norm was white organizations, or even for arts organizations. So I remember when I was with this organization, I had to attend some kind of, I don't know whether it was a statewide, but it was, you know, like 50 people getting together, and they were all arts based. I walk in and they say, oh, you're Imogene, because of course I was the only Asian person.
Oh, right.
Yeah. You know, so that tells you about what is the norm.
Totally.
Right. And when you're white, you don't get that.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So
because your race is invisible because it's mainstreamed in this way, you know?
So like I said, it's normalized. So as long as you're racialized and you're the only racialized person, so it doesn't matter what quote unquote race you are, as long as you're racialized and the norm is whiteness, then everybody knows who you are, right? And I don't think that even at VIU there is that recognition of what it means when you're being asked to do something, you know, that may be connected to the issue of diversity or inclusion. So do I get asked because I'm the token, or do I get asked because I actually have an expertise? Or do you actually allow me to choose whether to be part of something or not?
That's really, really interesting example. Whereas it sounds like with the Cumberland example, you were able to shape that by choosing to bring in a history as well as your expertise in that case. But
Yeah.
yeah,
So
it can be awkward in those.
I
Yeah,
chose to be party to that, and
yeah.
I bring up this tokenism because I have a friend. She, you know, grad school from Brown. She was actually in the English department, and she ended up in one of the SUNY universities. So it was a
Mm,
smaller SUNY university,
mm-hmm,
but where she was located, she as being racialized. So she was a Japanese national. So being racialized, checkbox, woman,
yeah,
checkbox,
yeah,
racialized.
yeah.
So she was asked to sit on all these committees, including president's committees. And
Mm-hmm,
then when it came time for tenure, she didn't have as many publications, right?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Wow.
That's what happens,
Yeah,
right? Because you're spending all this time in committee work.
yeah.
So ultimately she returned to Japan. So she's teaching in a Japanese university,
Hmm, hmm. And
right?
that's such an important point, is that that feeling of needing to say yes for a variety of political reasons, but also depending on where you are in your career, but also how that does impact not only your mental and emotional health, but potentially your own career goals because of how much labor that's being asked of you. Does that give you some optimism or suspicion about committee work in general? I have other questions for you, but that's I won't go beyond that in terms of
Well,
this
I
topic.
mean,
But
because we're in this particular moment, I always question, uh, you know, like what committees I'm on, because, you know, for some committees I get asked to be on it,
mhm.
but then I hear about that there's some other committee. It's like, oh, I didn't get asked to be on that one. So it's not
Yeah,
like I want to be on that committee, but to find out about it informally, like it would be
yeah,
nice to know that because of my particular interests and what I, you know, feel like I can say my expertise.
mhm, yeah,
So it should be my choice whether I want to, as they say, knock myself out and be
yeah,
on a
right.
gazillion committees, or be pick and choose which committee. So part
Mhm,
of being on a committee is the committee that you're on, do they actually do something?
yeah,
Or is it one of those committees that being able to say you have a diverse committee
mhm,
but doesn't do anything?
yeah,
Like I said, it gets to be political.
yeah,
But and I don't know, right?
mhm,
But if you don't, if you're not given the opportunity to decline, and like I said, you find out after the fact that there's something,
yeah,
because again, I was talking to somebody, another racialized individual, and they were on this committee that I was aware of, and they said, "Oh, I bet you could be part of it." And it's like, no, 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 you're on it. I'm glad to know of certain individuals.
mhm,
So that gives me some sense of confidence if I know that A, B, and C are in that committee,
mhm,
because I feel that our values are aligned.
mhm,
And
mhm,
if I felt that I had something to say, I feel like, hey, by the way, you know, this is
yes,
something, you know, like if it comes up, I would like you to make mention of
yes,
this.
yes,
But if you
yeah,
don't know who's on the committee and that it actually
mhm,
exists,
yeah,
then how do you, it's just like us being on VUFA, our
right,
names are out there. So
yeah,
that means if somebody says, gee, I want to talk to you because you're chair of this, or because you're an active member of VUFA,
mhm,
we're, like I said, our names are out there.
yeah,
So we are accessible.
it's public, yeah,
Yeah, we're public.
mhm,
So it's that whole issue of transparency,
mhm,
right?
yeah, it's
And
a very
so
good point.
like the whole thing with the Cumberland and sort of being told not to be noisy. It's
Mhm,
like, you know, like you're singling me out rather
mhm,
than the other people that I am associated with this, which
mhm,
means I'm really under your skin. And it's like,
yeah,
yes, right?
yes, I
From my
love that.
perspective, it's like, yes, you know,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love that
but
connection because some people would shrink away, right? And we know, of course, other people are allowed to be angry, but some people aren't. Their anger isn't welcome. You know, it's definitely. So I appreciate that you're like, good. I'm glad that I'm getting.
And it was, you know, at that time it was the anger that pushed me to do what I did, because I think in 2001 I was working full time, so that meant 4 and 3. And I would go up to Cumberland for these meetings in those power pantyhose, right? And you know, when I was writing these letters, I was writing them at midnight, you know, like 1.5, you know, single space commentary. And that was the anger. Well, okay, maybe it's not anger, it's adrenaline, right?
Right, adrenaline, yeah.
Adrenaline was fueling, and of course I was younger then too.
And excellent writing skills.
So I was writing those things to make my statements, right? And then they would get read out. Because again, you know, like other people may have equal arguments, but as an academic, you know how to structure your argument, hopefully in the strongest and best ways. So I'm not saying that other people don't have things to say, but we know how to present things, right? And
absolutely.
then, you know, physically being there and not shirking, right? So that's all important. And I think because I've passed on that short essay that I wrote on erasure, Stephen Hume wrote a piece on it. It was cultural imperialism. So I'm quoted in that article.
That's cool.
But nobody knows that I actually contacted Stephen Hume at that time, because I knew that he had a relationship, like his partner had been, I think they actually had lived in Cumberland at one time. Because part of, you know, for journalists, once they get a tip and it sort of like twigs their interest. So he was, you know, presented with some information, and then he wrote it, right? And that makes a difference, because they did not know what hit them, because like I said, it was a council decision. And at that time, I was still active in the Association for Asian American Studies. I wrote to people in the US, you know, NYU, I you know, San Francisco State, you know, like they were getting these letters from people. It's like, we're little old Cumberland, you know, like, how is this possible that people know us outside of Vancouver Island, outside of BC? And this is where I really leaned hard on my relatives. I said, this is the one thing I'm asking you to do. Even if it's a 2-sentence statement, please do this.
And look what you accomplished. So that's amazing.
Well, like I said, it wasn't me alone, but you know, there was this team, and so other people don't know that I'm a recipient of a Ruth Master Hero Spoon. So people from, you know, the Courtney Comox area know about Ruth Masters. She was an environmentalist. She has since passed on, but she was part of the Clayoquot Sound activist group. So after that, if she felt that people made a difference environmentally, so here you're thinking that this piece of land ultimately became this park. So there was an environmental consequence, right? It's not just sort of, as they say, paving it over and putting, you know, a Costco or a Walmart there, right? She handed out, I don't know how many spoons, but it says Ruth Masters Spoon 2002. So it's just, you know, a simple spoon, but if you're from that area, people say, oh, a Ruth Masters Hero Spoon. Wow.
That's so cool. Yeah.
You know, like in some ways it's more meaningful than saying, hey, I got a PhD.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Right. Because, you know, like all of us academics, you know, somewhere along the way, we are multi-degreed, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
But there are not that many Ruth Masters spoons kicking around.
I love that. That's fantastic. So we're going to pivot, and I'm going to ask say something that maybe not everyone will know. The Faculty Association would know this, but you've been curating many, many, many anti-racist resources for the Faculty Association as the chair for Human Rights and International Solidarity Committee. How many months have you been doing this work?
Since June.
Since June.
So
yeah. Yeah, so I'm wondering if you can share with us a little bit about what motivated you to do it, what sort of influences how you curate it, and what do you want the faculty to do with this information? If you or what is your hope for it? I guess. Yeah.
So I started it in June because I put together a statement from HRISC on Black Lives Matter.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to be frank. I wish that some of the executive would have said, we stand with you in supporting that statement, rather than it just being from me.
Mm-hmm.
Because I recognize that you can't just say VUFA because nobody voted on it. Right.
Yeah.
But, as individuals,
mm-hmm.
people could have stood,
mm-hmm.
as they say, shoulder to shoulder.
Yeah.
And I don't think the majority of people knew that I wrote it until it came out. Okay. So the fact that I wrote it and it wasn't shared, and I guess part of it is, as a racialized person, why do I have to tell people that maybe this should be shared and supported? Right. Okay. So I'm being very honest in stating
Absolutely. That. Everybody who's listening, listen to that point. Let's let that sink in. Yeah.
So do I, as a racialized or other racialized people, have to tell you what to do? Because, some of it is common sense, right? So when when I wrote that statement, and so I wasn't, like first out of the gate writing that statement, others were, and because I teach about race and ethnicity, I'm on a lot of lists.
Right.
So it was like, well, if I'm on the list and if people are struggling and they don't have the background, it makes sense to share this information. So it's not like I am, well, okay, yes and no. My box gets filled with lots of stuff. And I'm one of those that actually looks, I scan through it. It's like, oh, this seems to make sense. Yeah. And because it's human rights, so my lists are not just about Black Lives Matters. It's about anti-racism. So it includes articles that are very specific to Indigenous concerns, issues, women's issues too, because again, that's human rights. I mean, you could put a lot more on it, but I put ones that to some extent resonate with me. So in any kind of list, there is a degree of bias, right? Yeah. So I admit to that. And I noticed that there were a lot of webinars, and I would say that because of COVID, having those webinars are useful because quite often they're recorded, or if you're interested enough, you might decide, okay, I have to register for that, but maybe I missed it, but because it's from a larger organization, maybe it was recorded, and then you could, do the Google and then find out, yes, there is a recording of it, right? Yeah. So if you don't know something exists, you won't even try looking for it, right? That's right. Yeah. So there's part of that. So having those lists for the webinars, but I also saw, certainly not from June, but more recently, in my class, I always have a 5% learn outside of the classroom. It's an opinion piece. That's so cool. It's like, I don't want a big thing, 150, 200 words, just, what did you learn from this? So all these webinars come in handy. Yeah. And because I have a diverse student body, so some of the ones that I had, so there was one on race and slavery that came out of Brown University. So I'm an
Mhm.
alum. So I'm thankful for that, because I have students who are from the African continent, and it was like, that spoke to them, right?
Yeah.
So having things to speak to students, whether they're Indigenous or, you know, IPOC from, you know, the diaspora as such,
Right.
that there are all these different things. And it's not just about social sciences. I happen to be a member of the Vancouver Art Gallery, so I get
Yeah.
those art connects, and it's like, oh wow, look, this is really interesting, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So this speaks to so many different communities at VIU,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So all these issues, whether you're, well, I even have stuff from that deal with STEM issues,
Mm.
because
Yeah.
and it shows you how broadly read or interest I am. So
Yeah.
so I get the nature briefing coming into my inbox.
That's
So I
great.
get the science stuff, I
Yeah.
get the art stuff, I get some of everything, and that's why I have the ability to sort of pick and choose, because if you're
Yeah.
so narrow,
Yeah.
you're only seeing one thing.
That's right. Yeah. 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 And so this collection you put out, how, just for everybody to know, how often do you put out this collection of
It's
up-to-date
been weekly.
resources? Weekly. So
It's
weekly
weekly, and on
since
occasion
June.
I've done it twice a week
That's
because there's
fantastic.
so much stuff coming out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we've talked
So
about how hopefully, or it should be, or some version of it would be more public and on a web space. And I'm wondering, like in your mind, what do you hope the average person who's opening that email does with it, or what do you hope it offers to people? I suppose is my
well,
question.
okay, so when I initially put some stuff out, and I of course people, you know, probably did not expect me to do it weekly,
It's a lot of
right?
work. Yeah.
Well, it is, and
Yeah.
so I think there's not actually a recognition of how much work that is, because
Yeah.
for the articles, pretty much I've read them,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I at least have scanned them enough to know that it should be
Yeah.
either on, or I not get rid of it, right?
Right.
Because there's lots of stuff out there.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I admit I am not a fast reader.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And because my inbox gets so many things, and like I said, I'm paying attention because I see that there is a need for these things.
Mm-hmm.
And because I'm on HRIS, some of my colleagues, part of the FIPSI or the provincial HRIS group,
Mm-hmm.
they send a couple things. So I'm including, you know, on occasion, a couple things. I'm on the board of the Laurie Institution, and on occasion, some things get there that I wouldn't see otherwise. And, you
Mm-hmm.
know,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm doing this cross-pollination of the organizations that I am a member of, which is also a statement that everything that I'm doing
Mm-hmm.
sort of reinforces my interests, and it is a self-interest, race and ethnicity,
Mm-hmm.
inclusion,
Mm-hmm.
diversity, because it's also part of my lived experience,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So when people have asked me for information, like early on, I sent some references, and I said, well, you know, like, I've used these in class, but they're used in a very specific context. So I don't know how you're using it,
Mm-hmm.
because, you know, like, if you're asking me for something specific, I can give something to you. But
Mm-hmm.
when you have these lists, you can pick and choose, you know, like,
Yeah.
say you teach whatever, and it's like, oh, this is really appropriate for the topic that I'm,
Mm-hmm.
you know, going to be discussing next week or whatever. But
Yeah.
if you just ask me for information, again, context matters in how you make use of any type of resource, right?
Yes. Yes.
So
Absolutely.
you could be giving a resource, and it could be an amazing thing, but it's totally inappropriate for a particular use.
Mm-hmm. So is there a bit of a cautionary aspect to this as well? Like that you're hopeful that people using these sources kind of check themselves a little bit about where they are in terms of their understanding and learning about racism before they determine what they're going to do with the material, if it might be for teaching?
Well, I think, you know, because many of the items, like I said, the ones that are coming out now are webinars, they're opinion pieces, and if it's an opinion piece, it's an opinion, right?
Right.
So you will always want to frame it.
Right.
And so like in the spring, I'm teaching a course on language and culture. And because of all the stuff that's going on, I want to talk about the weaponization of language, right?
Timely topic.
there's so much stuff out there, right? And it can be about politics, it can be about race, all kinds of different things, right? So I'm thinking that some of that curation is like, so some items it's like I'm actually putting it in my notebook and said, this one is for the course, this one, you know, it's for the course, but it's also for everybody else. Right. So I'm doing a little bit of my earlier picking and choosing, curating for my course, that because the student said, do you have that syllabus ready? He said, no, what, are you crazy? I mean, I know what I want to do in those sections, but no, I don't. But see, I'm still cobbling together things.
Well, I know for me, I mean, with my interest in anti-racism, it has, in my research, it's often been focused on Black studies. And so when you send out curated resources like that, it's very helpful because I have a broader interest in critical race studies and anti-racisms, but I haven't necessarily had the time to always sink my teeth into the various many directions you could go. So for me, that's a very valuable thing to be able to kind of start, you know, expanding that important work. So I appreciate that. I'm wondering, is there something?
Can I say one other
go ahead.
thing about that?
Please do. Yeah.
Because you know, you commented about anti-Black racism. And I think what I am presenting to people is the anti-Asian racism that I think that most people sort of bypass.
Yes.
And, you know, and this goes back to what I had said about anger and the pandemic. That when I read about these things, and it's just, and remember I had earlier stated that a survival mechanism of my parents and my grandparents' generation was to be silent or compliant. So when you're quiet and compliant, that allows people to keep smacking you. Right. So somehow it's permissible to be racist. Okay, an example. I was in a classroom and a student was talking, and they had I think it was high school on the mainland, and they said that they were cognizant that there was anti-Asian racism and the school wasn't apparently doing anything. And then there was an incident with a Black student, and then there was, you know, a gathering in the school auditorium to talk about racism.
Right.
So rather than saying racism is bad for everyone, certain racism is more bad, worse, and it should not be viewed in that way. You know, racism is racism. It affects everybody.
Well, it's, I wonder too sometimes if, you know, it's such an uncomfortable topic that I think always has to be talked about. But for those people who don't want to take on the whole thing, which they should, let's manage it and just focus on the vocal group that's organizing themselves right now, because we wouldn't want to go much further and then have to open up all kinds of other conversations which need to be had. So I really appreciate that point. So for you, this is definitely an area of insufficient attention, that anti-Asian racism is not being discussed enough or at all in a public way, you would say. In Canada in particular, it sounds like,
well,
in US it was a bit different.
So part of this also is, you know, so if this is an area of study,
Yeah.
part of this is tied into how people specifically of East Asian descent, you know, like people that look kind of like me, is that as a person of Asian descent, we are the perpetual foreigners. So that makes it easier to ignore us because we're foreign. We're the contagion to really make the point, right? Indigenous, by that name alone, means from the land, right? Indigenous.
Right. Yeah.
And because of enslavement, if you're Black, there is a history tied also to the land in a particular way. And then everybody else outside of that is viewed really as, like I said, the outsiders. And so few people recognize that the whole issue of anti-Asian racism is a repeat of what happened in the 19th and 20th century. Like I said, my grandfather paid the head tax. It was a way to keep out Asians, specifically Chinese people.
Right.
So the amount of policies that were directed against Chinese, then Japanese, and then people of South Asian, it stems initially from Chinese, because the Chinese were the ones that were really viewed as undesirable, and then that undesirability became attached to other populations. Yeah. And if you study history, you realize that the forced removal of Japanese peoples during World War II was not just about safety. It was, you know, it's basically saying that these people are viewed, because they're viewed as outsiders, as foreigners, that they were in competition to real Canadians. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's all that kind of stuff when we're not teaching it.
Yeah. Right. Right.
So to me, this is a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I will say that you know, you had earlier asked about my sort of academic community engagement. So that community engagement, starting with Cumberland, you know, at that point, I didn't see myself as becoming sort of like a Chinese Canadian expert, because my doctorate is on field work in Tanzania, right? So I've done this big turnaround, but if you look at my trajectory and where I am now, I have friends who say, you know, these past years, basically 2 decades, have led you to this point. So yeah. I am a board member of the Chinese Canadian Museum. I'm one of 3 women in a board of, is it 20? Can't remember, 2022. And there are 2 other women who were appointed to it that have some other official capacity, right?
This is the kind of thing that does remind me of the importance of, like, I don't know if you like this term or not, but like the public intellectual work. It's also activist work, but that, you know, ways of educating people are not just through the barrier type of education that involves paying for tuition and coming into a classroom. It's being on these boards and helping shape and influence how museums are set up, how public spaces are set up to learn things, right? Not just in a tuition-based educational system.
So I will say now that I am one of, well, okay, I'm the ringleader. I proposed this to Nanaimo Museum, and they're willing to run with it. So back in the early summer, before the murder of George Floyd, we were going to do an anti-Asian racism project. And then after George Floyd, of course, things changed. And it's like, no, we can't just do anti-Asian. It has to be anti-racism project. So that's what we're doing. So this is going to be a community-based project. We're trying to develop a virtual museum exhibit.
That's great.
Right? So that we will have resources. So nothing is set in stone, but I do want to sort of put this message out there that one of the things that we're talking about is how everyday racism exists in our environment. Because that's how you get the systemic racism, and that people don't recognize that this is a problem, right?
Yeah.
And when we part of this was raised by a colleague in the Nanaimo Community Archives, and she had commented that she had seen this article about an exhibit down in the States, and they did it on like an anti-racism kind of project. And one of the people that came up with the idea, they volunteered at the thrift store, and they kept on saying, this stuff that keeps coming in, it's racist. So they put together this exhibit of everyday items.
Oh, that's awesome.
That you find. So I'm going to give you the example. I grew up with it.
It's very interesting.
You know why? So I grew up with it because I remember in the family household, we had a salt and pepper shaker of, quote unquote, a mammy figure and the butler figure. Right. So I'm thinking, how many people had that? Right.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether you're a coffee drinker, but back in the day, so this brand still exists, Nabob Coffee. I have a little, again, it's from the family home. I have two. So I said, I'll donate these to the exhibit. I have two coffee scoops, and on the end is a little nabob figure with the turban, you know, like the shrine, you know, like the Shriner when they do the parade.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
Well, you know, if you're coming from that particular area, is that how you want to be represented? Right. So that's an everyday thing.
Yeah. Those are often some of the most powerful examples for some people, I think, to just see how that everyday commonplace it's the perversity of it being right on your dinner table, right? And you're consuming it.
And then I know this was in the States. I don't know how common this was in Canada, but the little quote unquote black jockey figure garden ornament.
Yes, I know the one. Yeah. Yeah.
So once you say it, people know it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So part of it is to document it. And then what about the foods that we consume? You know, okay, so maybe this is not something that you would be a flag for you. I go into supermarkets and I see a Oriental foods aisle. Oriental is problematic. So I always say, if you're going to use Occidental in a sentence, I'm okay with you using Oriental. But if you're not using Occidental, I don't want to hear you use Oriental.
Yeah, if people were like, where Occidental food area? What does that mean? No one would even understand, right?
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's that kind of thing, and and nobody's thinking about it, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, well, that's exciting. I hope to learn more about that and about as that unfolds. It sounds like it's in early stages.
So the other thing, again, because of my curating things that twigged on me, I think it's in the upcoming one. It's a photographer, and the title of the article is called "Ghosts of Segregation," and I'm thinking, what about those places in our landscape other than the names? Yes, so there is that whole issue of names.
Yeah.
But those places where things happened. So because it was in the South, they talked about, you know, the entrances for Black customers versus the white customers, right? But and you're young enough, I don't know whether you're aware of this, you know, either historically or you're, you know, however that information might have filtered down. Balconies in theaters used to be for the less desirable people, which happened here. So I know,
wow.
like I know somebody in Duncan, and the Odeon Theater, she said when she was a kid that if you were white, you could sit on the bottom. If you weren't, you had to sit up on top. And she and her friend like sat up on top, and then they would do this spitball thing because they were kids,
But
right?
that's also
But
perfect.
also perfect. But it was
Yes.
because it was a balcony, and I would love to sort of have that photograph with
Yeah.
potentially a sign saying, you know, whites only, or colored people, or however it was phrased. Because if you were
Yeah.
indigenous, you were expected
Yeah.
to go upstairs, right?
Yeah.
You
And
know,
it's,
and
yeah.
part of that, you know, that story is part of the Viola Desmond story, because she, you know, out east. So you know who I'm talking about, right?
Yes. Yeah.
That she was fined because she didn't sit where she was supposed to sit, which was supposed to be in the balcony.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So people don't realize that this was also here in BC, in our neighborhoods as such.
Yeah, right, right. And it's not just I mean, a lot of those narratives end up being American and given to us, right? And then we don't realize that the same things are playing out here. And I like this idea too of reminding people that spaces mean different things to different people. So like a balcony seems innocent to some, but for those who might have some kind of a memory of this or historical knowledge, so I can see so much value in putting that forward so people can rethink that space. On that
Well,
note,
and
I
it's
want to,
also to
yeah,
have conversations about it, right?
absolutely. Yeah. And so there are conversations now supposedly being had about reimagining Nanaimo, reimagining VIU to some extent. And I'm thinking back to the commentary that you created for Heritage BC called Erasure, a statement on racism, inclusivity, and equity. And there's one sentence I wanted to quote. You said, "In the colonial history of BC, those who settled and remained became those who mattered." Now, in my mind, in 2020, those who matter, that our sense of who matters needs to expand dramatically. And so I'm just wondering, how how do we create space that's not just inclusive and multiracial, but that it's so that it's desirable and welcoming and allows people to thrive in ways that they haven't been able to in the past? Do you have thoughts on this?
Well, part of it is who are the people in positions of power. If you don't see yourself there, so this is one of the things. Like I know we've gone through an EDI process, and you know, in conversations with other individuals, it's like VIU lacks diversity,
Yeah.
right? So how do you encourage diversity? And the other thing is, when you're encouraging diversity, so yeah, you do that hire. Do they feel welcomed? If they don't feel welcomed, they're going to go someplace where they're going to feel more welcomed.
Right.
Right. So that is about educating the larger group. And if you're not hearing that sense of inclusiveness is really something we want, then it's just talk. And this is where my anger stems from. I'm hearing more talk and not enough action.
Yeah.
And I keep hearing that there's no money. So I get we're in a position that is a difficult position.
Yeah.
But we also know that when, and I'm not saying current administration, but any administration, whether it's at a university or politically, municipally, provincially, federally, they have a pet project, you know, there's going to be some dollars that will be set aside for.
Right.
So what is on your radar? What matters?
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
matters sufficiently that you're going to put some dollars to it, and
Right.
enough dollars that it makes a difference. So it's not that tokenism, you know, like,
Mm-hmm.
yes, you can get the quote unquote racialized person to do X,
Mm-hmm.
but if they don't have any power in the sense to sort of put forward policy, and again, you know, like, if the policy is going to people that don't see why they should be supporting it because it doesn't affect them,
Mm-hmm.
then it might just be, like I said, you need to have people representative in those higher positions
Yeah.
who get it.
Right. Yeah.
Because a lot of it has to do with attitude.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, because here we're talking about like I said, and again, I'm going to be very frank. It's like, we have on our website that we got this money to, you know, explore inclusion, diversity, equity. And it's like, we got the money because we're that bad.
Mm.
You know, we're so lacking that the government said, you need to up your game,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we're bragging that we're that bad.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we need to really do something with that. And you're saying leadership, where it doesn't always, it can be obviously at the highest echelons, but leadership can also mean have the power to actually make meaningful policy change and decisions,
Yeah.
and not just be there in a tokenistic way. And funding and education, and then translating that into some action that then creates a desirable space that not just attracts people, but keeps people here.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly.
And obviously it's not just the institution that's going to keep someone here, it's this broader community as well. And hopefully those things can change in a similar way too. So I love that you're angry, and a lot of people don't like angry women, and a lot of people don't like angry women who
Angry,
are racialized
racialized.
women, especially.
Exactly.
Absolutely. And our dear friend Audre Lorde has said that anger is loaded with information and energy. And so we were talking prior to the interview that I was saying that my reading of COVID-19 times is that there's a lot of anger in the air and a lot of fear. Often they're combined across the political spectrum. So if anger can be useful, and if it can be information and energy, I'm just wondering if you can leave us with some thoughts on how you see that energy in the COVID-19 lens, and what we can do with what you hope it can be done with it, I suppose, once we get out of this phase that we're in.
Well, I would say that, like I had mentioned, this anti-racism project that I'm doing with the museum. So our hope is that we will actually have something for 2023. So, you know, any kind of exhibit, it takes time. And I think with this particular one, clearly it's something where community engagement is going to be involved, because it's not just like it can't, okay. No surprise, I'm the only racialized. No, I should backtrack. I have two students involved who are also racialized, but as the older, bigger adults in the room, I'm the only racialized person. Right. So, and that's a very common thing, you know, for especially being on the island. So this is the other thing that the work that I have done is basically being outside of Nanaimo. So I'm on all these different boards, and they're all based in Vancouver. So maybe thankfully, because of COVID, we're doing all this Zoom stuff. So I'm not making all these trips across. So that is happening. But because, and I will say, I can thank COVID-19 for pressing on this anti-racism project, because you introduced me by saying, I also teach in global studies. Yeah. So for global studies, we regularly have students who do international internships. Well, you know that didn't go anywhere, right, because of COVID. So the call went out to the various faculty members, like, do you have any projects that a student might be interested in
Mm.
working with you. You know, I have all these little side projects, but most of my side projects, because they're side projects, they don't actually get completed as such. So if I end up writing some little paper, it's like, hey, I got something, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But they're always small little things. I don't try and take on big things because, you know, I have realized over time, you just can't do it. You know, so if somebody wants you to write something and it's a
Right.
short thing, yeah, I can
Yeah,
do that.
you can do it.
If you
Right.
want like a major paper, forget it. It's not happening, right? Uh, so I was told that the student wanted something. So I asked the student, like, what are you interested in? And the response was human rights and vulnerable populations. So this was like right at the start of all the anti-racism stuff. And that's why I said, oh, how would you like to do a project? Because so thank you to COVID and the students' interests, it matched my particular interests that I could see something happening. And so I initiated this sort of conversation, and initially it was like, let's just look at the newspapers, what kind of stuff is happening. So thanks to COVID, there is in fact other groups who are tracking this Asian racism, you know, and the larger hate issues.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
prior to that, you know, so it's one of those good bad things. Something bad happened, but something good is coming out. So you're getting real data, as such, that wouldn't have been tracked. You know, and there are things happening in Canada and the United States. So yeah, there's some overlap, but the fact that people are talking about it, it wasn't talked about before.
So this is enabling
so to
new
me,
kinds
this
of
is
conversations
yeah.
And projects to be across space in
Yeah.
different ways that weren't possible before.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's great. So are you hopeful about the post-pandemic period? Do you think there will be a new and better reality? I'll leave you with that last sort of thought on this, and any kind of
Well, okay, so one of the things
vision.
that I told, I don't know which student it was, I used to, you know, back in the day when you didn't have, you know, like these fancy computers and all the programming, way back when, I used to have a line, you know, that would scroll across my screen. Hope is a risk that must be run. And I think that is still a valid statement. So I would leave it at that.
I love it. Thank you very, very much for your time. I appreciate it. And I'm sure everyone will look forward to watching this either on International Human Rights Day or over the holidays, or it will be posted throughout all next year as well. So thank you so much for your time, Imogene, and we'll see you next time.